A Navy SEAL returned home without warning, expecting a quiet visit with his aging father. Instead, he watched from a distance as his father was humiliated. Hot liquid thrown onto his body like he didn't matter. The old man didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He simply lowered his head and absorbed the moment in silence. The soldiers stepped in, not with fists, but with control. Taking his father home, washing away the stains, treating the burns. As he worked, he realized something deeper was being cleaned away. Years of fear, silence, and being invisible. Beside him, his German shepherd watched closely, sensing that this wasn't just cruelty, but the beginning of something dangerous. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends for stories that matter. Frank Rowe had learned how to walk without sound. At 72, his body no longer moved the way it once had, but his habits were precise. Measured steps, careful turns, shoulders slightly hunched as if apologizing to the air. He wore a faded Navy maintenance jacket 2 sizes too large, sleeves rolled twice to keep them from dipping into the mop water. His hands were veined and rough, fingers swollen at the joints. But they worked with quiet certainty. Harborfront Convention and Marina slept differently at night. By day, it glittered. Glass walls catching the sun, white yachts lined like promises along the pier, polished marble floors echoing with heels and ambition. By night, it became a place of shadows and echoes, of half-lit corridors and humming machines. The kind of place that remembered footsteps long after people forgot them. Frank knew every inch of it. He knew which cameras flickered instead of recording cleanly, which service doors creaked, which hallway lights buzzed before dying. He knew which locks were management only, and which could be opened with a careful twist and the patience of someone who had been overlooked long enough to stop asking for permission. Tonight was a gala night. The last of the guests had drifted out an hour ago, wealthy donors in tailored coats, laughter trailing behind them like perfume. The ballroom still smelled of champagne and expensive cologne. Frank worked alone now, pushing his cleaning cart across the marble floor, the wheels whispering instead of rattling because he'd oiled them himself. Inside the cart, beneath folded rags and a bottle of disinfectant, something small shifted. Peanut. The puppy was barely 4 months old, all oversized paws and soft tan fur, with ears that hadn't yet decided whether they wanted to stand or fold. His eyes were too large for his face, dark and questioning, and his ribs still showed faintly beneath his coat. Frank had found him 3 weeks ago behind a seafood warehouse, shaking in the cold, tangled in plastic twine. He had tried shelters. He had tried asking neighbors. He had failed. So Peanut came to work. Frank lifted the mop, wrung it out slowly, then whispered, "Easy, boy," not looking down. Peanut stilled at the sound of his voice, tail giving one careful wag before settling. Frank smiled faintly. It didn't last. Voices echoed from the far end of the hall. Loud, careless, young. Frank paused, shoulders tightening just a little. They weren't supposed to be here. A group of 5 stepped into the service corridor, dressed in loosened tuxedos and designer dresses, jackets slung over shoulders, faces flushed with alcohol and boredom. At the center walked Dashiell Hargrove, Dash, as everyone called him. Dash was tall, athletic in a careless way, with dark hair swept back and a grin that never quite reached his eyes. His face was handsome but sharp-edged, like it had never learned restraint. He moved as if the building belonged to him, which, in many ways, it did. Beside him was Blair Sloan. She was slim, mid-20s, with long platinum blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and skin that caught the light like porcelain. Her makeup was flawless even now, hours after the event. One hand held her phone, already angled outward, thumb hovering over the screen. Blair's smile was practiced, wide, knowing, hungry. "Still people working?" Dash said, laughing. "Didn't we donate enough to shut this place down for the night?" Frank lowered his eyes and kept moving. He had learned that eye contact invited trouble. One of the men snorted. "Guess the help doesn't sleep." Blair's phone lifted. The red recording light blinked on. Frank felt it then, the familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet resignation settling in. He had felt it many times before, at bus stops, in break rooms, in offices where no one learned his name. He was invisible, until he wasn't. Dash picked up a half-full cup from a nearby table, something dark, steaming faintly. Cacao mixed with liquor, left over from the event. He turned it in his hand, amused. "Hey, old man," he called. "You miss a spot." Frank stopped. He turned slowly, careful, respectful. "Sir," he said, voice soft, steady. "I'll be out of your way in just a moment." Dash stepped closer. Too close. "You hear that?" Blair said to her camera. "Service with manners, rare species." The cup tipped. The heat hit Frank's face before his mind could register what was happening. Liquid splashed across his cheek and temple, soaking into the collar of his jacket. The sting followed instantly, sharp, breath-stealing. Laughter exploded around him. Frank staggered back a step, hand flying to his face. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply sucked in air through clenched teeth, eyes watering. Inside the cart, Peanut yelped. The sound was small but sharp, slicing through the laughter like glass. Blair's phone swung toward the cart. "Wait, did you hear that?" Another voice chimed in. "Is that a dog?" Frank's heart dropped. Peanut whimpered again, frightened now, claws scrabbling against plastic. Dash's grin widened. "No way. Pets aren't allowed in here." One of the men bent down, pulling aside a rag. "There's a puppy," he said, delighted. "You serious?" Frank stepped forward instinctively, pain forgotten. "Please," he said. "He's just a rescue. He doesn't have anywhere else." Blair laughed, sharp and bright. "This just got better." Her phone stayed trained on Frank's face, on the burn blooming red along his skin, on his shaking hand, on the fear he was trying not to show. "Look at this," she said to her audience, "breaking rules, bringing animals into restricted areas. Someone's about to lose their job." Frank lowered his head. He did not beg. He had learned long ago that begging only entertained people like this. He simply stood there, silent, absorbing it the way he always had. That was when the air changed. At the far end of the corridor, where the light dimmed and the hum of machinery grew louder, a man had stopped walking. Carter Rowe stood still, one hand resting loosely near his belt, posture relaxed in a way that was anything but. He was 28, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing long-sleeved digital camouflage and tan combat boots scuffed from use. His face was clean-shaven, angular, his jaw tight. Blue-gray eyes fixed on the scene ahead. Beside him stood a German shepherd, Kestrel. The dog's body had gone rigid, muscles coiled beneath short black and tan fur. His ears were up, nostrils flaring as he drew in the air. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stopped. A behavior Carter knew well. It was the same stance Kestrel had taken once in a dusty alley overseas, seconds before gunfire erupted. The same stillness before danger revealed itself. Carter's chest tightened. He recognized the man, being humiliated immediately. His father. Rage surged hot and fast, a familiar wildfire rising in his blood. His instincts screamed at him to move, to step forward, to end it. His hand twitched. Kestrel shifted, just enough to step half a pace in front of him, blocking him. Carter froze. He looked down briefly, meeting the dog's eyes. There was no panic there, only focus. Warning. If he stepped in now, fists clenched, uniform visible, this would become something else. Not an old man being abused, but a dangerous veteran assaulting civilians. Carter exhaled slowly through his nose. He reached into his pocket instead. From the shadows, unseen, he lifted his phone and began recording. The words carried clearly. The laughter, the threats, Blair's mocking commentary, and one thing more. A man in a tailored coat, older than the rest, hair neatly trimmed, face composed, stepped forward slightly. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't filmed. His presence was quieter, more controlled. "Enough," he said calmly. "Don't touch the cart." Dash rolled his eyes. "Relax, Gideon." Gideon Vale glanced toward the service door, then back at Dash. His voice dropped just enough to sharpen. "We don't need complications, especially not near Storage 3. Carter's eyes narrowed. Kestrel's nostrils flared again. The moment passed as quickly as it came. Dash scoffed, tossed the empty cup aside, and waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever. Let's go." They turned, laughter fading as they disappeared down the hall. Frank remained where he was, hand pressed to his burning skin, eyes downcast. Peanut whimpered softly, pressing himself into the corner of the cart. Carter stayed hidden. He watched his father straighten slowly, dignity pieced together from habit alone. And he knew, without doubt, that something far bigger than cruelty had just brushed past them. Something that smelled like danger. Something that had already decided Frank. Roe did not matter. Carter Roe Das did not speak as they left harbor front. The cold outside felt sharper than it should have. A clean coastal wind that cut through layers and memory alike. Frank walked beside him with a slight limp, his maintenance jacket pulled tight. Peanut bundled awkwardly inside it, a small trembling warmth pressed against his chest. Carter kept one hand on the car door as he unlocked it, the other steady, controlled, like everything else about him. Only when the doors were closed did Carter let himself breathe. Frank's face was red and blistering where the liquid had struck him, the skin already tightening. Carter retrieved a bottle of water from the trunk and a small first aid kit he always kept close. Habit, not fear. He soaked a cloth and pressed it gently to his father's cheek. Frank flinched, then relaxed. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice thinned at the edges. "It's nothing." Carter didn't answer. He had learned, over years of training and deployments, that arguing with pain only gave it more power. He worked in silence, careful not to rush. Peanut peeked out from Frank's jacket, eyes wide, ears folded low. The puppy whimpered once, then stilled when Carter glanced at him. "It's okay," Carter said quietly, not to Frank. Peanut leaned into the sound, trusting it. They drove home without music. Frank's house sat at the edge of a narrow street a few miles inland. One-story weathered wood, a porch that creaked in familiar ways. It was a house that had been paid off long ago and never upgraded. Carter noticed the peeling paint on the railing, the porch light that flickered before settling. Things Frank never fixed because they still worked well enough. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and lemon cleaner. Carter guided his father to the couch, then went to the bathroom to fetch ice and burn cream. He moved with purpose, but his jaw stayed clenched. thoughts pacing faster than his steps. Frank watched him with the same quiet observation he had used all his life. "You didn't have to come back," Frank said when Carter returned. "I mean, tonight. You could have just gone home." Carter shook his head, applying the cream with slow precision. "I was already there." Frank let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Figures." Peanut wriggled free and padded across the floor, nails clicking softly. He sniffed the couch, then hopped up beside Frank, pressing his small body against the man's side. Frank's hand moved instinctively, fingers threading through the puppy's fur. "He's good," Frank said. "Smart, gentle." Carter watched the way his father's shoulders eased when Peanut settled. "He's lucky," he said. "He found you." Frank looked away. "Or maybe I found him." Silence stretched again, but this time it was heavier. Finally, Frank spoke. "You saw." It wasn't a question. Carter nodded once. "You didn't step in," Frank continued. His tone was neutral, but there was something beneath it. Pride, maybe, or relief. "I'm glad." Carter's eyes lifted. "I wanted to." "I know." Frank hesitated. "But that would have cost you more than it helped me." Carter didn't deny it. He knew how easily narratives shifted, how quickly a uniform became a weapon in the wrong hands. He had seen it happen to others. Frank touched the edge of the bandage, winced slightly, then said the words that cut deeper than the burn. "I'm used to it, son. Don't ruin your future because of me." Carter straightened slowly. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. He met his father's gaze, searching for something, anger, bitterness, but found only acceptance. That was what hurt the most. "I'm not ruining anything," Carter said. "I'm just paying attention." From the doorway, Kestrel stood motionless. The German shepherd had followed them in without command, as he always did. His black and tan coat caught the lamplight in sharp lines, muscles defined, but still. He was 5 years old, in his prime, eyes dark and focused. His ears twitched occasionally, tracking sounds beyond the walls. Cars passing, a dog barking down the street. But his body stayed angled toward Frank, protective, alert. Carter noticed it then. The way Kestrel hadn't relaxed. Not fully. He crouched, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. "What is it?" Kestrel's nostrils flared. He turned his head slightly, gaze fixed not on Frank, but on the jacket draped over the chair, the one Frank had worn at the marina. Carter followed the line of sight. He lifted the jacket and held it out. Kestrel stepped closer, sniffed carefully, then stilled again. No growl, no bark, just tension. "There's something on it," Carter murmured. Frank frowned. "From work? Maybe." Carter folded the jacket and placed it in a sealed bag from his kit. "I'll wash it later." Kestrel didn't move until the jacket was gone. That night, Carter lay awake on the old couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced slow circles. Peanut slept curled against Frank's legs in the bedroom, his breathing soft and uneven. Kestrel lay near the front door, eyes half open, listening. Carter replayed the recording on his phone again, earbuds in, volume low. The laughter, the threat, the careless words, and the line that didn't belong. Storage 3. He searched the marina's public site, then its maintenance maps. Storage 3 didn't appear on any brochure. It wasn't listed for events or rentals. It existed only as a numbered block on internal schematics, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Too easily. The next morning, Carter returned to Harborfront alone. He wore the same camouflage, same boots, same watch, No jacket, no insignia. Just a man moving through a place he already understood better than most. The day staff bustled around him. Different faces, different energy. The marina was alive again. Boats, rocking gently, flags snapping in the breeze. Carter kept his head down, observing. He approached a security desk tucked near the service corridor. Behind it sat a woman in her early 30s, average height, dark hair pulled into a low bun. Her skin was olive-toned, her expression alert but not unfriendly. A small scar cut through her left eyebrow, pale against the rest of her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for maintenance," Carter said. "Night shift." She glanced at the screen, then back at him. "Badge?" "I'm with a contractor," Carter replied smoothly. "HVAC." She studied him a second longer than necessary, eyes sharp. "Name?" "Rowe." Something flickered across her face. Not recognition, but consideration. "Sarah Nguyen," she said finally. "Security supervisor. Maintenance is down the hall, third door." Carter nodded. "Thanks." As he turned to leave, she added, "Night shifts see things most people don't." Carter paused. "That's so?" Sarah met his gaze evenly. "That's what makes them dangerous." He continued down the hall, her words settling in his mind. Halfway there, Kestrel, waiting outside, tied loosely to a post, let out a single, low sound. Not a bark, a warning breath. Carter looked back. Kestrel was staring at the far end of the marina, body tense, tail still. Nothing appeared out of place, and yet something had shifted. Carter felt it too, a subtle tightening in the air, like a storm gathering without clouds. He didn't know what Storage 3 held. He didn't know who Gideon Vale really was, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Silence had a weight, and it was getting heavier. The clip went live before sunrise. By the time Frank Rowe woke, his face already burned, not from the injury, but from the way his name was spreading. The video Blair Sloan had posted was short, sharp, and edited with precision. It opened with laughter, cut to Frank flinching, then ended with Peanut's frightened bark frozen in a single frame. "Rules exist for a reason. Employee violates VIP restrictions." The captions were clean. The narrative was simple. Frank watched it once on his old phone, the screen trembling slightly in his hand. Then he turned the device face down on the kitchen table and stared at the wood grain as if it might tell him something kinder. Peanut nudged his knee, whining softly. "It's all right," Frank said, though his voice lacked conviction. People see what they want to see. Across town, Carter Rowe watched the same clip from a very different angle. He sat in his car, engine off, phone mounted on the dashboard, eyes steady. He watched, not just what was shown, but what had been cut. The missing seconds, the angle shifts, the absence of audio before the spill. Blair knew what she was doing. Carter didn't release his own footage. Not yet. Truth, he knew, was not just about facts. It was about sequence, context, structure. Release it wrong and it became noise, or worse, ammunition for the other side. Instead, he began to build. He returned to Harborfront under the guise of a contractor again, moving through departments that barely looked at him. He photographed shift rosters posted near break rooms. He memorized which supervisors overlapped during gala nights. He noted when certain cameras went offline for maintenance and how often that maintenance coincided with private events. He spoke quietly to people who didn't like being spoken to. A bartender who had seen Dash before. A janitor who avoided eye contact but nodded when Carter mentioned late-night cleanups. A dockhand who shrugged and said, Some doors stay locked for a reason. By the third day, Carter was tired, but not discouraged. That was when the technician approached him. His name was Evan Morales, late 20s, lean build, with narrow shoulders and a habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he spoke. His hair was dark and thinning early, skin pale from too many nights indoors. He worked IT support for Harborfront's internal systems, cameras, access logs, storage monitoring. "I heard you were asking about footage," Evan said quietly, catching Carter near the maintenance elevator. Carter studied him. "I'm asking about gaps." Evan swallowed. "I can help." They sat in Evan's car, parked 2 blocks away from the marina. Evan kept checking his mirrors, fingers tapping the steering wheel in uneven rhythms. "There are logs that don't match," he said. "Cameras that say they're down but still draw power. Storage access that doesn't get flagged." Carter listened without interrupting. "I can pull a copy," Evan continued. "Off the network. But I need time." "You'll have it," Carter said. "And protection." Evan gave a thin smile. "That's what scares me." Carter believed him. And that belief would cost him. That same afternoon, Frank was called into an office he had only cleaned before. Never entered as a guest. Gideon Vale stood when Frank entered, hands folded neatly in front of him. Gideon was in his early 50s, tall but not imposing, with silver beginning to edge his dark hair. His suit was perfectly tailored, his beard trimmed close along a sharp jawline. He had the kind of face that suggested reasonableness even when none was present. "Mr. Rowe," Gideon said warmly. "Please, sit." Frank remained standing. Gideon didn't press. He slid a folder across the desk instead. Inside was a neatly typed document. A non-disclosure agreement, along with it, a letter offering early retirement, severance pay, a clean exit. "No blame," Gideon said. "No accusations, just resolution." Frank stared at the paper. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of recognition. "You want me quiet," Frank said. Gideon smiled gently. "We want you protected. These things spiral. Social media is unkind." Frank thought of Peanut, of Carter. He thought of how tired he was. "I need time," he said. "Of course," Gideon replied. "Take the evening." As Frank left, Gideon's eyes followed him. Not cold, not angry. Assessing. Before dawn the next morning, Carter walked the marina with Kestrel. The air was damp, heavy with salt and fuel. Kestrel moved ahead of him, leash loose, posture alert. They passed rows of storage units, gray metal doors marked with faded numbers. Kestrel slowed, then stopped. He angled his head toward a smaller structure set apart from the others. No signage, no windows. Just a reinforced door with a keypad older than the rest. Carter frowned. "What is it?" Kestrel didn't respond. He stepped closer, nostrils flaring, muscles tightening. His tail went still. Carter checked his watch. He was late. Evan was supposed to call. "Come on," Carter said, glancing back toward the main building. "We don't have time." Kestrel hesitated, just a second longer than usual, then obeyed. They walked away. Halfway down the pier, Carter's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "I can't do this. They know I looked. I'm sorry." Carter stopped cold. Kestrel turned immediately, staring back toward the storage area they had just left. For the first time since Carter had known him, the dog let out a low, frustrated breath. Not a warning. A failure. By nightfall, Evan Morales was unreachable. His access credentials were revoked. His desk was cleared. HR sent a bland email about personal leave. Carter drove to Evan's apartment. The lights were off. Mail stacked in the box. No answer. Back at Frank's house, the silence pressed heavier than before. Frank sat at the kitchen table, the NDA unsigned but unfolded. Peanut lay at his feet, head resting on Frank's shoe. Kestrel paced once, then lay down facing the door. "They offered me money," Frank said quietly, "to leave." Carter closed his eyes. "They didn't threaten you?" he asked. Frank shook his head. "They didn't need to." Carter felt the weight settle fully then. Not anger, not fear, responsibility. He had misjudged the situation, not the danger, but the people. He had trusted a frightened man to be brave. He had ignored his dog to chase efficiency. The evidence was gone, and the silence he had chosen was no longer strategic. It was a mistake. Carter knelt beside Kestrel, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. "I should have listened," he murmured. Kestrel remained still, but his eyes stayed open, watching, waiting. The message arrived at dawn. No sender, no explanation. Just a line of text and a location pin. Marina Ledger. Names don't disappear on their own. Carter stared at the screen for a long time before locking the phone. He had learned long ago not to trust anonymity, but also not to ignore it. Whoever had sent this knew two things: the marina and fear. By mid-morning, he was back at Harborfront. This time not as a contractor, but as a man with nowhere left to retreat. Kestrel walked beside him, leash slack, head level with Carter's thigh. The dog's movements were precise, unhurried, but his awareness filled the space like static. The Marina Ledger wasn't a place, it was a pattern. Carter found it buried in an outdated HR terminal, accessible only through an old internal login, one of those legacy systems no one bothered to fully dismantle. The screen flickered as lines of text loaded slowly, each name appearing one by one as if reluctant to exist. Employees, contractors, temporary staff. And then, beside certain names, a blank. No termination date, no transfer, no record, just absence. Carter scrolled carefully, jaw tightening. The gaps weren't random. They clustered around specific years, specific events, specific nights. A voice spoke behind him. "You're not supposed to be there." Carter turned. The man standing in the doorway was broad-shouldered and thick-necked, late 50s, with a shaved head and a scar that pulled the corner of his mouth slightly downward. He wore a faded security jacket, sleeves stretched tight over forearms that still carried strength despite age. Hector Bram, former security. Carter had seen his name once. Then, never again. "You must be Hector," Carter said evenly. Hector snorted. "Used to be." He stepped closer, eyes sharp but tired. "You should leave. That system doesn't forget trespassers." Carter studied him. Hector's posture was guarded, but not hostile. The stance of a man who had once believed in rules and paid for it. "I'm looking for people who vanished," Carter said. "Not criminals. Workers." Hector's gaze flicked briefly to Kestrel, who had gone still at Carter's side. "Your dog's military," Hector said. "K9, Carter replied. "He notices things." Hector exhaled slowly. "So did I." They left together through a service exit that smelled of oil and rust. Hector drove an old pickup, dented along the sides, interior stripped down to utility. As they crossed the bridge away from the marina, Hector finally spoke. "Security isn't about watching people," he said. It's about knowing who's allowed to be invisible. He told Carter about the nights that never made sense, about access logs that reset themselves, about supervisors who asked questions and then stopped asking. "I flagged it once," Hector said. "Thought I was doing my job." "What happened?" Carter asked. Hector's mouth tightened. "I got reassigned, then written up, then erased. No pension, no apology." They stopped near a row of abandoned storefronts by the water. Hector killed the engine. "There was a girl," he said. "Event staff, quiet, smart. She noticed patterns before I did." "Name?" Carter asked. Hector hesitated. "Lena Park." Lena Park lived in a converted studio above a closed nail salon. She was in her early 30s, petite, with straight black hair cut blunt at the shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, like someone who hadn't seen enough sun. She wore oversized sweaters and moved carefully, as if every sound might carry too far. She didn't open the door at first. Only after Hector spoke her name softly did the chain slide free. Lena's eyes went first to Kestrel. "Your dog?" she said quietly. "He's trained." "Yes," Carter replied. "He won't hurt you." Lena nodded, but her gaze lingered on the dog longer than necessary, as if reading something in his stillness. Inside, the apartment was sparse. A mattress on the floor. Stacks of notebooks. A single scarf draped over a chair. "That's from work," Lena said, noticing Carter's eyes. "From the marina." She handed it to him without explanation. The moment Kestrel caught the scent, his reaction changed. His ears flattened slightly, his muscles tightened. He stepped closer to Lena, not threatening, but intent. His nose hovered inches from the fabric, breathing deeply. Then he froze. Carter felt it like a pressure shift in the room. The same chemical edge, fementum, the same undertone he had noticed days ago. "What is it?" Lena asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Something industrial," Carter said. "Not cleaning supplies. Not fuel." Lena swallowed. "Storage areas," she said. "Restricted ones. I used to serve events near them." She sat slowly, hands clasped together. "They'd tell us not to ask questions," she continued. "If someone didn't show up the next shift, we were told they quit. But some of them, they didn't pack. They didn't say goodbye." Her eyes flicked to Hector. "I wrote things down, dates, names." Carter nodded. "That's why you're still alive." Lena looked at him sharply. "That's why I'm invisible." As Lena spoke, Kestrel suddenly lifted his head and turned toward the window. Not barking, not growling, just watching. Outside, a black sedan idled across the street, engine running, headlights off. No one got out. After a moment, it drove away. Lena's hands began to shake. "They're still watching," she whispered. That night, Carter returned home later than usual. Frank was sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting long shadows. The NDA lay open in front of him, creased and worn from handling. "I need to tell you something," Frank said, before Carter could speak. Carter pulled out a chair and sat. 20 years earlier, Frank had worked maintenance during a different expansion phase of Harborfront. New storage units, new contracts, new money. "I saw shipments come in that weren't logged," Frank said. "Equipment that didn't match invoices. People who asked questions disappeared from schedules." He paused, throat tightening. "I reported it. Once." "What happened?" Carter asked quietly. Frank closed his eyes. "A meeting. Papers. Threats dressed as concern." He looked at his son then, eyes clear but heavy. "You were 10. I was told accidents happen to people who don't protect their families. Carter felt something inside him fracture. Not anger, not blame, understanding. "So I signed," Frank continued. "I chose silence, and they learned something from that. That you could be erased," Carter said. Frank nodded. "That people like me could be?" He straightened, shoulders squaring with an effort that cost him. "But I was wrong. Silence didn't protect you. It just taught them how far they could go." Carter reached across the table, resting his hand over his father's. "We're done being invisible," he said. Kestrel lay at their feet, head up, eyes open, listening. Alyssa Monroe did not look like someone who chased ghosts. She was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with chestnut hair cut just above her shoulders and streaked faintly with gray. She did not bother to hide. Her suits were conservative, dark blue, charcoal, tailored for courtrooms rather than cameras. She wore no visible jewelry except a thin silver ring on her right hand. Her face carried sharp intelligence, but her eyes revealed a restraint learned from years of watching cases collapse inches from truth. She had been watching the Hargrove family for over a decade. "What you're bringing me," Alyssa said, folding her hands on the conference table, "is not nothing." Carter sat across from her, posture straight, shoulders square. Kestrel lay at his feet, still as stone, head resting on his paws, but eyes open. "But it's not enough," she continued. She slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were names, shell companies, offshore accounts, lines connecting to Hargrove Enterprises like veins beneath skin. "I know where the money goes," Alyssa said. "I know how influence works. What I don't have are people willing to stand in the light." Carter nodded. "I'm working on that." Alyssa studied him closely. "Your father?" "Yes." She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "That makes this harder and stronger." She leaned back. "I'll open a preliminary inquiry, quietly. But if this becomes public before it's ready, it will die." Carter understood the warning. He had lived long enough to know that truth, mishandled, could be more fragile than lies. Outside the building, winter clouds hung low over the city. Carter paused on the steps, breathing in cold air. "You trust her?" Frank asked later that night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Frank looked smaller than he had a week ago, not weaker, but more exposed. His jacket hung loose on his frame, and the burn on his cheek had faded to a dull pink scar. Peanut slept curled against his ankle, rising and falling with quiet breaths. "I trust her limits," Carter said. "That's enough for now." The first backlash came 2 days later. A letter arrived at Carter's temporary unit command, formal, impersonal. An internal review had been opened, language careful and neutral, but the meaning unmistakable. Unauthorized involvement in civilian matters, contact with media-adjacent individuals, potential breach of conduct. His pending promotion was frozen, his K-9 partnership status flagged. When Carter read the letter, his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. Frank noticed anyway. "They're coming after you," Frank said quietly. "They're protecting themselves," Carter replied. That night, Kestrel refused to sleep. He paced the house once, then twice. His ears flicked toward the back door, then the front. Carter watched him from the couch, instincts stirring. "Something wrong?" Frank asked. Before Carter could answer, the sound came. Glass. Not shattering. Testing. Carter was on his feet in a second. He moved silently to the window, peering through the curtain. Nothing. No figures. No movement. but the lock on the back door was scratched. Fresh. In the morning, Frank found the message. It was taped neatly to the refrigerator, as if placed with care. The invisible should stay quiet. Nothing was missing. No drawers opened, no valuables disturbed. The message was the point. Frank's hands trembled as he peeled the paper free. "They didn't even steal," he said. "They just wanted me to know." Carter felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "They wanted to remind you who decides," he said. He wanted to act. To strike back fast, loud, decisive. To expose everything he had, force the story into daylight before it could be buried. He reached for his phone. Kestrel stepped in front of him. The dog's body went rigid, head low, eyes fixed on Carter's face rather than the door. It was not a warning of danger. It was a warning of choice. Carter froze. Slowly, he lowered the phone. "You're right," he murmured. Frank watched the exchange, something dawning in his eyes. "He does that when you're about to make a mistake, doesn't he?" "Yes," Carter said, "when I want the fast answer." They sat in silence, the message still on the table between them, like a threat that breathed. By the end of the week, the pressure mounted. Alyssa called less often. When she did, her voice was careful. "They're pushing back," she said. "Hard." An anonymous source leaked partial information online, twisted just enough to cast doubt on Carter's motives. Headlines appeared questioning the involvement of a Navy SEAL in a labor dispute. Comment sections filled with speculation. Frank stopped going to the marina. He stayed home, walking Peanut in the early mornings, avoiding neighbors' eyes. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the knowledge that silence had failed once already. "I can do the press conference," Carter said one night. "I can speak." Frank shook his head. "They'll make it about you, about the uniform, about violence." He straightened, spine aching but resolute. "It has to be me." Carter studied him, seeing not the tired man who had cleaned floors for decades, but the one who had once tried to speak and been shut down. "You don't owe this," Carter said. Frank met his gaze. "I do. To myself." The press conference was scheduled quietly, through Alyssa's office. No banners, no spectacle. Just a room, microphones, and the promise of testimony. The night before, Carter found Frank standing on the porch, staring out into the dark. "Are you afraid?" Carter asked. Frank considered the question. "I was afraid for 20 years, he said. "This is different." Inside, Kestrel lay near the door, eyes open, ears turning with every distant sound. Peanut slept curled into a ball beside him, unaware of the weight pressing down on the adults around him. Carter looked at the two dogs, one trained to detect danger, the other still learning the world. He thought of the choice he had made days ago, to wait, to build, to choose the harder path. For the first time since this began, he felt certainty instead of urgency. Tomorrow would not be easy, but it would be right. The federal courthouse did not announce drama. It stood clean and pale against the winter sky, glass and stone reflecting a morning that felt ordinary. Too ordinary for what was about to happen. Reporters gathered in loose clusters near the steps, breath fogging as they spoke in low, practiced tones. Cameras were set, tripods adjusted, microphones tested and retested. Frank Rowe waited just inside the doors. He stood with his shoulders back, hands clasped loosely in front of him. At 72, his body shook, not from fear alone, but from effort. The tremor ran through his fingers and into his forearms, a reminder of years spent working quietly, unnoticed. He wore a simple gray coat, pressed but worn at the cuffs, and shoes polished more out of habit than pride. Carter stood a step behind him. He had positioned himself deliberately, not beside, not in front. Present without overshadowing. His posture was relaxed but alert, the way it always was when he anticipated danger. Kestrel sat at his heel, eyes forward, ears angled slightly outward, absorbing the space. Frank looked back once. "You don't have to stay so close," he said softly. Carter met his gaze. "I'm not here to speak," he replied. "I'm here to listen." Frank nodded. They stepped outside together. The murmur of voices swelled, then hushed as Frank approached the podium. The microphones looked oversized in front of him. Black foam heads clustered like a question waiting to be answered. Frank cleared his throat. "I'm not here for sympathy," he began. His voice wavered at first, then steadied. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if laying bricks one at a time. He told them about night shifts and locked doors, about workers who vanished from schedules, about being told to forget what he had seen. He did not name names. He didn't have to. "I signed papers," Frank said. "I chose silence, and I lived with that choice longer than I should have." A camera zoomed in on his face, catching the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes shone without spilling tears. "I'm here because silence didn't protect anyone. It just taught the wrong people how powerful it could be." Behind him, Carter watched the crowd. Faces blurred into a mass of movement and color. But patterns emerged. Security positioned along the edges, plainclothes officers scanning hands and bags, reporters shifting their weight as if sensing something more than a story. Kestrel shifted, not abruptly, not dramatically. He rose from a sit into a stand, weight balanced, head turning slightly toward the far side of the plaza, toward a cluster of utility access panels near the building's technical wing. Carter felt it before he understood it. The air had changed. Kestrel's breathing slowed. His body went rigid, every muscle drawn tight beneath his coat. His gaze locked onto a point that meant nothing to anyone else. Then he moved. With a sharp pull on the leash, Kestrel yanked Carter backward, hard enough to break his stride. Carter stumbled a half step, instinctively bracing. "What?" Carter began. Kestrel did not bark. He froze, ears forward, tail still, eyes fixed. Carter followed the line of sight. There, half hidden behind a maintenance barrier, something metallic glinted in the pale light. Too clean, too intentional. Carter's heart rate spiked. "Security!" he called out, voice cutting through the air. "Right side, technical wing." Frank faltered at the podium, words catching in his throat. A uniformed officer nearest the barrier reacted instantly, hand to radio. Two more moved in, cautious but fast. A fourth raised a hand, signaling the crowd to stay back. The device was discovered in seconds. Small, compact, wired. Not a bomb, not exactly. A disruption unit designed to cause panic, noise, chaos. A threat meant to scatter a crowd, to isolate a man at a podium. The plaza erupted into controlled movement. "Please step back. Everyone, stay calm. Move toward the exit, slowly." Frank was guided away from the microphones, a hand firm but respectful on his arm. Carter moved with him, Kestrel tight at his side, eyes never leaving the device as technicians arrived. The evacuation was swift, efficient. No injuries, no screams, just a sudden, sobering awareness of what could have happened. Inside the courthouse, Frank sat in a quiet room, hands clasped again, breathing shallow but steady. A paramedic checked his vitals, then nodded and stepped away. Carter knelt in front of Kestrel, pressing his forehead briefly against the dog's. "Good," he whispered. "You did good." Kestrel exhaled slowly, tension releasing in measured increments. His eyes remained alert, but the rigid edge softened. Alyssa Monroe entered the room minutes later. She looked different now, jacket unbuttoned, hair slightly disheveled, eyes sharp with something more than professional distance. "That device," she said, closing the door. Behind her, just turned intimidation into obstruction of justice. Frank looked up. "Someone wanted me quiet." "They wanted you gone," Alyssa corrected. "And now they've shown their hand." Outside, the press conference resumed, this time under a different light. Reporters spoke in urgent tones, cameras capturing images of federal agents escorting equipment out of the plaza. Headlines began to write themselves. "Attempt to disrupt witness statement at federal courthouse." Alyssa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then at Carter. "A judge just signed a warrant." "For what?" Carter asked. "Search and seizure," she said. "Storage 3. The words landed with weight. Within the hour, live feeds showed federal vehicles lining the service road at Harborfront. Agents in marked jackets moved with purpose, cameras capturing every step. Doors were breached under court order. Boxes were carried out, sealed, labeled, undeniable. Inside the courthouse, Frank watched the broadcast on a small monitor. He said nothing. But something in his expression shifted. Not relief, not triumph. Recognition. Carter stood beside him, hands folded behind his back, posture familiar to anyone who had ever watched him prepare for the unknown. "This doesn't end it," Frank said quietly. "No," Carter agreed, "but it stops the pretending." Kestrel lay at their feet, head up, eyes tracking the room even as the moment settled. He had done what he was trained to do, what he was born to do. As the day wore on, statements were issued, investigations announced, names whispered, then spoken aloud. There would be hearings, challenges, attempts to bury what had been unearthed, but the darkness no longer had cover. Frank rose slowly, steadying himself on the table. "I want to go back out there," he said. Carter hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," Frank replied, "but I want them to see me finish." They returned to the plaza, together. Frank stepped to the podium once more. The microphones leaned in. "I didn't come here to be brave," he said. "I came here because someone finally listened." He glanced back, just briefly, at Carter and Kestrel. "Truth doesn't shout," Frank continued. "It waits. And when it's heard, it asks us to do better." He stepped away. No applause followed. None was needed. The arrests came without spectacle. No sirens screamed through the night. No cameras chased flashing lights. Federal vehicles arrived at Harborfront before dawn, their presence quiet and methodical, as if the building itself had been holding its breath, and was finally allowed to exhale. Gideon Vale was taken first. He wore the same tailored composure he always had. Dark coat, neat beard, posture straight even as handcuffs closed around his wrists. His face showed no panic, only calculation. He nodded once to the agents, as if acknowledging a professional courtesy long overdue. The Hargroves followed. The patriarch's expression shifted between disbelief and outrage. His wife stared ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to look at anyone. And Dashiell Dash Hargrove, once so careless with laughter, now looked smaller, his tailored clothes hanging differently on his frame. His eyes darted, searching for leverage that no longer existed. The network unraveled quickly after that. Companies collapsed under scrutiny. Offshore accounts froze. Emails once buried resurfaced, carrying dates, instructions, threats. The pattern became impossible to deny. And yet, not everyone fell. Some names slipped through on technicalities. Expired statutes, insufficient corroboration, evidence just shy of admissible. A few workers declined to testify, choosing safety over closure. Their silence was not betrayal. It was survival. Carter watched it unfold from a distance. He sat in a small interview room, walls bare, hands resting loosely on his knees. The internal review had concluded. His promotion remained stalled, not revoked, but suspended in bureaucratic limbo. His K-9 partnership had survived, though not without conditions and quiet warnings. "You did the right thing," one officer told him privately, "but right doesn't always move fast." Carter nodded. He had learned that lesson more than once. Frank received the call on a Tuesday morning. The marina's HER director, new, careful with every word, confirmed it formally. Frank Rowe was cleared of all wrongdoing, his record amended, his name restored. Frank thanked her politely and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, the phone resting beside his hand. Peanut lay at his feet, tail thumping softly against the chair leg. Kestrel watched from the doorway, eyes alert as always. "You're free," Carter said gently. Frank looked up. "I was free the moment I stopped lying to myself." That afternoon, Carter was asked to attend a meeting he had been expecting and dreading. Dash Hargrove sat across from him in a stark interview room, orange jumpsuit replacing the tailored suits he once wore so easily. His hair was messier now, his face drawn, stubble darkening his jaw. Dash leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I can help you," he said quickly. "Names, places, things you don't have." Carter said nothing. Dash's eyes flicked briefly to the camera in the corner, then back. "I'll cooperate. Full cooperation. I just need some understanding." "Understanding of what?" Carter asked. "That people make mistakes," Dash replied. "That one bad night shouldn't define a life." Carter studied him, the man who had laughed as another man burned, who had assumed consequences belonged to others. "What would cooperation buy you?" Carter asked. Dash swallowed. "Less time." Carter stood. "There's a difference between helping justice," he said, "and trying to outrun it." Dash's voice rose. "You think you're better than me?" Carter paused at the door. He thought of the message on Frank's refrigerator, of the device at the courthouse, of the names erased from the ledger. "No," Carter said. "I think you had more choices." He left without looking back. Outside, Kestrel waited, sitting perfectly still despite the bustle around him. When Carter emerged, the dog rose smoothly and fell into step at his side. "You did good," Carter murmured. Kestrel's ears twitched, but he did not look for praise. He never did. That evening, Carter walked Kestrel along the edge of the marina, now quieter, stripped of its old arrogance. Kestrel stopped suddenly. He turned his head toward the water, gaze fixed on a single, unmoving point beneath the surface. No scent, no sound, just stillness. Carter waited. After a long moment, Kestrel exhaled and moved on. Some truths, Carter realized, were not meant to surface. The public response was swift but uneven. News outlets praised the investigation while arguing over its implications. Online debates flared and died in cycles. Attention shifted, as it always did. But change, quieter and slower, began to take root. A portion of Harborfront was closed indefinitely. Contracts were rewritten. Oversight committees formed, not with fanfare, but with paperwork and scrutiny. One storage wing was converted into offices for a newly funded worker support center. Frank was offered a role there. Honorary gatekeeper, they called it. A symbolic title, but one Frank accepted with a nod. He stood at the entrance most mornings now, greeting workers as they came and went. Not as a guard, as a witness. "You don't miss the night shifts?" someone asked him once. Frank smiled faintly. "I see enough in daylight." Carter watched his father find a rhythm again. Slower, yes, but steadier. Peanut grew quickly, his clumsy steps turning confident, his fear fading into curiosity. He followed Frank everywhere, a living reminder of second chances. Kestrel adjusted too. He remained vigilant, but the constant edge softened. He slept more deeply. His posture, once perpetually ready, now allowed moments of rest. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, Carter stood beside his father at the marina's edge. "It doesn't feel like a victory," Frank said quietly. Carter shook his head. "It wasn't supposed to." Frank looked out, across the water, eyes reflecting the fading light. "People think justice fixes things. It doesn't." "No," Carter agreed. "It stops them from getting worse." Frank nodded. "And sometimes, that has to be enough." As they turned to leave, Carter felt Kestrel brush against his leg, an unspoken acknowledgement, brief and certain. The past would not be rewritten. Some names would never be spoken aloud. Some stories would remain unfinished. But the silence that once protected the wrong people had been broken, and in its place stood something quieter: responsibility. They walked home together. The marina behind them, no longer a monument to hidden power, but a place learning, slowly, to remember. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive quietly, through instinct, through courage, through a moment when someone chooses to do the right thing instead of the easy one. In this story, justice did not erase the past. It did not undo pain or return what was lost. But it forced the truth into the light. And sometimes, that is the only miracle we are promised. In everyday life, we face the same choice: to stay silent and feel safe, or to speak, to protect, to stand, knowing it may cost us something. If you believe that loyalty still matters, if you believe that instinct can be a warning, and that God sometimes speaks through quiet signs rather than loud answers, then this story is for you. May God watch over you and your family. May He protect those who feel invisible, and may He give us the courage to listen when the warning comes softly. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends for more stories where faith, instinct, and human choice collide. Thank you for watching.